Okay, Refugee, Chapter 1. Refugee is a story of three children that live in different times. One of them is a little boy that lives in Nazi Germany in the 1930s during the World War. The second child that you'll be introduced to is Isabel, that lives during the Cuban Revolution, and finally Mahmoud, a Syrian refugee. We're going to start off with the story of Joseph. Berlin, Germany, 1938. Crack, bang. Joseph shot straight up in bed, his heart racing. That sound, it was like someone had kicked the front door in. Or had he dreamed it? Joseph listened, straining his ears in the dark. He wasn't used to the sounds of this new flat, the smaller one that he and his family had been forced to move into. They couldn't afford their old place. Not since the Nazis told Joseph's father he wasn't allowed to practice law anymore just because he was Jewish. Across the room, Joseph's little sister Ruth was still asleep. Joseph tried to relax. Maybe he'd just been having a nightmare. But something in the darkness outside his room moved with a grunt and a scuffle. Someone was in the house. Joseph scrambled backwards on his bed, his eyes wide. There was a shattering sound in the next room. Krish! Ruth woke up and screamed in sheer blind terror. She was only 6 years old. "Mama!" Joseph cried. "Papa!" Towering shadows burst into the room. The air seemed to crackle around them like static from a radio. Joseph tried to hide in the corner of his bed, but shadowy hands snatched at him, grabbed for him. He screamed even louder than his little sister, drowning her out. He kicked and flailed in a panic, but one of the shadows caught his ankle and dragged him face first across his bed. Joseph clawed at his sheets, but the hands were too strong. Joseph was so scared that he wet himself, the warm liquid spreading through his nightclothes. "No!" Joseph screamed. "No!" The shadows threw him to the floor. Another shadow picked up Ruth by the hair and slapped her. "Be quiet!" the shadow yelled, and it tossed Ruth down on the floor beside Joseph. The shock shut Ruth up, but only for a moment. Then she cried harder and harder. "Hush, Ruthie, hush," Joseph begged her. He took her in his arms and wrapped her in a protective big brother hug. "Hush now." They cowered together on the floor as the shadows picked up Ruth's bed and threw it against the wall. Crash! The bed broke into pieces. The shadows tore down pictures, pulled drawers from the dresser, and flung the clothes everywhere. They broke lamps and light bulbs. Joseph and Ruth clung to each other, terrified and wet-faced with tears. The shadows grabbed them again and dragged them into the living room. They threw Joseph and Ruth on the floor once more and turned on the overhead light. As Joseph's eyes adjusted, he saw the 7 strangers who had invaded his home. Some of them wore regular clothes, white shirts with the sleeves rolled up, gray slacks, brown wool hats, leather work boots. More of them wore the brown shirts and red swastika armbands of the Sturmbannbahn, Adolf Hitler's stormtroopers. Joseph's mother and father were there too, lying on the floor at the feet of the brown shirts. "Joseph! Ruth!" Mama cried when she saw them. She reached for her children, but one of the Nazis grabbed her nightgown and pulled her back. "Aaron Landau," one of the brown shirts said to Joseph's father, "you have continued to practice law despite the fact that Jews are forbidden to do so under the Civil Service Restoration Act of 1933. For this crime against the German people, you will be taken into custody." Joseph looked at his father, panicking. This is all a misunderstanding," Papa said. "If you'd just give me a chance to explain." But the brown shirt ignored Papa and nodded at the other man. 2 of the Nazis yanked Joseph's father to his feet and dragged him towards the door. "No!" Joseph cried. He had to do something. He leaped to his feet, grabbed the arm of one of the men carrying his father, and tried to pull him off. 2 more of the men jerked Joseph away and held him as he fought against them. The brown shirt in charge laughed. "Look at this one," he said, pointing. "The boy wet himself." The Nazis laughed, and Joseph's face burned hot with embarrassment. He struggled in the men's arms, trying to break free. "I'll be a man soon enough. I'll be a man in 6 months and 11 days. The Nazis laughed again. 6 months and 11 days. Not that he's counting. The brown shirts suddenly turned serious. Perhaps you're close enough that we should take you to the concentration camp with your father. No, Mama cried. No, my son is just 12. He's a boy. Please, please don't. Ruth wrapped herself around Joseph's leg and cried, Don't take him! Don't take my brother! The brown shirts scowled at the noise and gave the men carrying Aaron Landau a wave. Joseph watched as they dragged Papa away to the sounds of Mama's sobs and Ruth's cries. Don't be so quick to grow up, the brown shirt told Joseph. We're going to come for you soon enough. The Nazis trashed the rest of Joseph's house, breaking furniture, smashing plates, and tearing curtains. They left as suddenly as they had come, and Joseph and his sister and mother huddled together on their knees in the middle of the room. At last, when they had cried all the tears they could cry, Rachel Landau led her children back to her room, put her bed back together, and hugged Joseph and Ruth close to her until the morning. In the days to come, Joseph learned that his family wasn't the only one that the Nazis had attacked that night. Other Jewish homes and businesses and synagogues were destroyed all over Germany, and tens and thousands of Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps. They called it Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. The Nazis hadn't said it with words, but the message was clear. Joseph and his family weren't wanted in Germany anymore. But Joseph and his mother and sister weren't going anywhere. Not yet. Not without Joseph's father. Mama spent weeks going from one office to another in the government, trying to find out where her husband was and what she had to do to get him back. But nobody would tell her anything. Joseph began to worry that he would never see his father again. And then, 6 months after he'd been taken away, they got a message from Papa. He'd been released from a concentration camp called Dachau, but only on the condition that he leave the country within 14 days. Joseph didn't want to leave. Germany was his home. Where would they go? How would they live? But the Nazis had told them to get out of Germany twice now, and the Landau family wasn't going to wait around and see what the Nazis would do next. Stay tuned tomorrow for Chapter